Hidden below the surface of the rich Nile Valley soil, a treasure buried for nearly 2,000 years was suddenly, unexpectedly revealed. In 1945, a farmer in Upper Egypt, digging for fertilizer by a cliff, uncovered a huge 6-foot jar. In it were 13 ancient leather-bound papyrus codices, what we now know as the Gnostic Gospels. They turned out to be one of the most important biblical finds of the century. Written in Coptic, or Ancient Egyptian, the early Christian documents contained 49 treatises of the Gnostic sect.
In those books, there were many other Gospels that never had been part of the New Testament, many of which we hadn't known, except we knew that in the ancient world there had been many Gospels, but they were buried, they were destroyed, they were burned by leaders of the church who regarded them as the most abominable kind of heresy. So we never knew what the heretics said, we just knew that they were terrible. And now we finally hear them speak in their own words.
The text revealed stunning new information about the struggle between beliefs that arose after Jesus' death. Gnosticism's essential theme is that divinity is not an external force, such as that embodied by Jesus, but an inherent internal capacity available to every human being.
These Gospels have a kind of different message, because the Gospels that were chosen to be part of the New Testament between the 2nd and the 4th century basically have a similar message. They say, believe in Jesus and you'll be saved. These other texts, like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, says that the divine is to be found within you because we're created in the image of God, and therefore there's a continuity between the divine and the human. Irenaeus, the bishop who hated heretics, said, outside the church there is no salvation. Everybody must believe, and it's through the church that you can be saved. Outside, you're lost.
Until the discovery of the Gnostic text, most of what was understood about Gnosticism came through the writings of early church fathers who vehemently condemned it.
Tertullian, one of the leaders of the church, said, people are always asking questions. It's questions that make people heretics. It's questions that prompt all of the explorations that you find in these various texts.
One of the texts, the Pistis Sophia, which scholars date from 250 or 300 AD, sheds new light on how other ideas of Jesus' ministry fought to be heard during the effort to make official doctrine out of Christian traditions. The text features a remarkable argument between the Magdalene and the Apostle Peter.
Peter complains to Jesus, Mary is talking all the time. She should keep silent and say nothing. And in that text, Jesus encourages her to talk. You can see why this is not part of Catholic tradition.
Another important Gnostic text is the Gospel of Mary. The few text fragments that exist indicate that the Gnostics held Mary in high esteem as a visionary, apostle, and leader. In one significant passage, Mary reveals to other apostles that Jesus has shared secret teachings with her.
So you find actually in the Gospel of Mary that it's Mary who receives teaching from Jesus that isn't revealed to anyone else, not even Peter, not even his special disciples. If you look at the Gospel of Luke, it's Peter who's the leader, Peter is the spokesman, Peter is in charge. When you look at the Gospels that speak of Mary Magdalene, Peter is the foil, and Mary Magdalene becomes the prominent disciple. Peter is always complaining about her.
The Gnostic texts transform Mary Magdalene into the pivotal figure of early Christianity, with an authority unmatched by the other disciples. This version is remarkably different from the accepted canon.
In the Gospels of the New Testament, like Luke, for example, Luke talks about the disciples and the women. And the disciples aren't the women, and the women aren't the disciples, and that's very clear. But in some of the secret Gospels that were found, women are among the disciples, and among that group, Mary Magdalene is the most prominent.
The relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene has been hotly debated since the earliest days of Christianity. The Gospel of Philip, a Gnostic text, describes a love between Jesus and Mary that may have been sexual.
Most of the Jewish leaders, almost all, 98, 99%, were married and had children. They were following the biblical injunction to be fruitful and go forth and multiply. It was accepted convention if you were a 32-year-old man, as Jesus is described in the accepted Gospels, to be married and to have children. So many scholars look at that cultural evidence that if Jesus were a real human being, and if he did come out of Jewish culture, he almost certainly would have been married. And who would he be married to other than this Mary of Magdala, who's mentioned 12 times by name in the accepted Gospels, who's at every important place in the story of Jesus.
How likely is it that Mary Magdalene shared a deeper relationship with Jesus than the New Testament suggests? The anointing scene, often pictured with Mary holding an alabaster jar, may have contained important symbolic clues.
The idea that a woman is touching the feet of a man in a kind of erotic or semi-erotic gesture, wiping with her hair, you know, it's a pretty sexy scene.
Some people are viewing the anointing ritual that's present in all four Gospels as reminiscent of Hieros Gamos rituals that took place in the Mesopotamian region.
Hieros Gamos is a sacred marriage that we find in many pagan religions, where the idea is that there is a heavenly king and a heavenly queen in the divine world, and that's mirrored in the lower world, and that sex between a man and a woman could mirror the sex in the heavenly kingdom.
Ancient people believed they could gain profound religious experience through Hieros Gamos, a sexual union usually performed by the Lord and a woman in the community. It provided symbolic and literal fertility for themselves, the land, and their people. But is there evidence that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were more than symbolic sexual partners?
The Gospel of Philip has a very provocative passage which says Jesus loved Mary Magdalene more than all the other disciples and used to kiss her often on her, and then the text breaks actually, but most people think mouth is the appropriate word to put in that blank space. In the text itself, the suggestion is made that Jesus and Mary Magdalene are a pair.
Many within traditional religion invoke the Magdalene's role as the apostle to the apostles as an argument for female priesthood.
There were mystery religions in the Roman Empire, and in some of these mystery religions, goddesses were venerated. And it's believed by some that there were priestesses or sacred prostitutes who carried out the rituals of these goddesses. And so some people believe, based on the anointing ritual, that Mary Magdalene could have been a priestess of Isis, carrying out the Hieros Gamos ritual with Jesus.
Isis is the wife of Osiris. Osiris is killed, his body is cut into pieces. Isis and her sister Nephthys put him back together, anoint his body, and stay with him for 3 days. And at the third day, he comes back from the dead. So this idea of the anointer and the one who waits for 3 days by the tomb is not an uncommon connection.
Every god in the ancient Near East, a Roman god, a Greek god, an Egyptian god, would have a female partner. So it's quite unusual that the God of Israel is depicted without one.
Today, as in the early days of Christianity, Mary Magdalene embodies what the Orthodox Church has lost, the sacred feminine.
Mary Magdalene is tenacious enough not to give up. When all the other disciples had gone, she had not. Now, doesn't that somehow embody the tradition of absolute devotion beyond the grave? And I think that's part of the interest in the figure of Mary Magdalene in terms of devotion beyond the rational.
The Church finally agreed to represent Mary Magdalene in a different light. In 1969, the Vatican rectified Pope Gregory's miscasting of her as a sinner and began referring to her instead as a disciple of Christ. If the feminine voice has been sacrificed in the battle for orthodoxy, Mary Magdalene may hold the key to restoring it.